everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration tool custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. On today's show, we welcome Martin Annander, CEO of Spagank. Martin has worked as a designer, a teacher, a lead designer, a design director, and now has started his own game studio, and his team is in development on their first title. We discuss Martin's approach to running a studio, game development, and systemic design in all its forms. And that's one thing you're going to find out real fast, is that Martin is a huge fan of systemic design. And if you don't know what that is, you certainly will by the end of the episode. This was a really fun one. This was like having a water cooler conversation. We talk game design, we talk about working with others, we talk about games we like, games we don't, aspects of games that we think don't work, aspects we think that do work, both new and old games alike. This is a really, really chill, casual conversation. Really enjoyed it. Martin's a great guy. I think you're going to like him a lot. And here he is. So Martin, while we were getting ready here and going through pre-show audio tests and things like that, you said this was not on my outline, but you said you're a cynical bastard. Can you describe to me why that is?
I think if you do anything for a certain amount of time, the number of bad experiences will outweigh the good experiences. I mean, or at least that's how I see it. So that's where the cynical comes from,
yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I think it's funny, especially in this industry, when someone gets started and they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and then they've been in the trenches for a year or two, and it's just demeanor changes. Shit gets real.
Yeah, I remember because I studied game design at a vocational school in Sweden. And I remember thinking that, the non-serious students, finally, when I get into the industry, everyone's going to be awesome and serious and professional. And you have this vision of the industry as a glorious place. And I mean, it's just people, ultimately. Like you'll find the same kinds of people that you maybe didn't like at school. You'll find them in the industry too, because it's people. And sometimes it's personal chemistry. Sometimes it's something else. And, I mean, it's just, I think that when you grow older, you sort of learn that that's just the way it is. It's not, you can't change other people.
I also think, too, because I definitely related to that sentiment about being cynical, just because I find myself, the older I get, becoming more cynical towards some things. But I also have found that within that cynicism, there can be optimism. You can learn from that and be open to things. It's a weird sort of juxtaposition. I don't know if you've experienced a similar thing or not.
I think that part of the cynicism is a want for change. Like you want things to be different. You want to work in different ways. You want to work on different kinds of projects. You want to do maybe if you're not doing programming, you want to learn programming. You want to change things. I think that part of cynicism can come from maybe even frustration. You're not able or enabled to do those changes. And at least that's sort of how it's been for me, because I've always had very strong opinions. And if you're sort of have strong opinions and you feel that there's no, responses or even like any avenue for you to actually express them, then that causes cynicism.
Did wanting change sort of inspire you to want to start your own company?
I think I've always wanted to sort of make my own games. If you see the difference, sort of, because I mean I've worked with games for 16 years, but making my own game, that's a different thing. Like I'm responsible for that, instead of being one out of hundreds of people or even one out of 20 people when someone else calls the shots. I mean, if this project fails, it was my fault or maybe bad luck or whatever it was, but mine in some way, like creatively. Like even more than that, like working with people you believe in and being part of a thing where you're a central role, where you have a central role. And I think that's always been a drive for me. Like I've wanted to make certain kinds of projects, certain kinds of work with certain people that I've really liked working with, and then the opportunity sort of presented itself.
What was the opportunity?
I've been doing a lot of different kinds of things. I've been a studio manager. I've been doing programming. I've been a game designer, design director. But a random phone call I received once was basically like they were asking for a reference for a previous employee. And that basically led to a discussion about what was going to become our current publisher, Kind of Brave. And because they were looking for studios and they wanted people to pitch to them before they had started. So I decided to do that with a couple of friends, and because we had wanted to start a studio and we had sort of aligning visions of how games should be made and what kinds of games we wanted to do. And we pitched it, and we started in that studio actually a year ago. So December 1st, my co-founder started, and I started January this year.
Wow. That's really cool. And what kind of projects did you guys want to make? What did you align on?
So, I mean, my passion has always been systemic game design, like systemic games, because I grew up and played a lot of games in the 90s. And you had things like Ultima Underworld and the Ultimas overall, and you had, of course, Thief, The Dark Project, and System Shock, Deus Ex in early 2000 and so on. So, I mean, that's the kinds of games I grew up playing, and I sort of miss that magic and the systemic nature. Like the Ultima Underworld came from a background of a company that was making simulations, and the sort of mentality where everyone was a designer in the team. There was not like a specific person with just ideas. It was everyone was just part of it, and having that experience is something I think I've always wanted. I just never had the words to express it before. Mm-hmm. So basically, at first it was just me and one programmer. And I was trying to do some programming too, but I realized quickly that he's just so much better than I am. so I did other things instead. But that's certainly what I've always wanted to do, like build systems and see how they interact and invite the player to be a more active part of the project in a way.
Do you feel like there's any sort of modern games that do a good job with systemic design?
I mean, Minecraft, obviously, like Minecraft is definitely, and Minecraft is also part of why I think it's sort of a current thing to do systemics, because the Minecraft generation is a large chunk of gamers. Like, isn't it the most sold game ever or something like that? It's like it's huge. And all of them will not, of course, play other games later. Minecraft is awesome, and that's going to be their Legos. But I do think that it opens a lot of people's eyes to systemics. And also Zelda Breath of the Wild, I think, is a brilliant example with their chemistry engine.
When you guys are first starting out with this project, you guys, when you started the company, was like, did you have like, you mentioned there was a pitch, but did you have like, all right, this is the game we're going to make? Or was it like, these are a couple ideas that we have, but we know we're going to be able to make something?
In our case, we pitched kind of a 10-year plan. So how we want to work and how that sort of could work out over time if we're successful. And I think there was several projects, like the first project is going to be this, it's going to contain these systems, and then we can take those systems to the next project and we can keep going. Like build forward is the buzzword version.
How do you do that? How do you make a 10-year plan? I can't even think of like 1 year in 1 year what I'm going to do. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it's cool. It's amazing that you could do that and have that laid out. But what's the process of thinking about that and really getting into, here's all the things we want to do over the next 10 years. Here's why this company can be successful.
I think that basically, if you look at sort of the most ambitious project you've ever conjured up in your dreams, like sitting and talking to friends or anywhere, like you always have this super ambitious game. If you put that on paper,
sure,
just like the basic systems that it contains, it needs characters, it needs spaceships, it needs whatever it needs, and then you break those down and you sort of step back and you turn that into a game, and you sort of maybe the characters, that's going to be maybe the one thing you have in every single project you do. So maybe you just do a game circling around characters. That's your first project. And then you will have a very solid foundation character system that you can use for every project going forward. So it's almost kind of a goal first, backwards line of thinking. But it's really, it's really focused on systems and how these complex things gets made, because it's always composed of smaller parts, of course.
Right. So it's sort of like a very modular design kind of mindset, where it's like you're creating these systems that can be reused in other projects too.
Absolutely, and it was actually inspired. I don't actually know if this is true, but this is how I was told about it. But Rockstar made Table Tennis, which was a published game,
I remember that.
And everyone was
Yeah,
sort of surprised. But why would they make a table tennis game? They are the GTA people, right?
Yeah. Right.
But the reason, I was told, the reason was that they wanted to work on their animation systems. So they took a game that was basically just two characters and a board, whatever, or table. I don't know what they call it. I'm not a sports person, but but they have their table tennis, obviously. So table, and just animation. Like, it was a super good opportunity to work on that animation system, and then they went on and made GTA 4, which obviously uses that even more. And that got me thinking. Like, when I heard about it, that's a brilliant way to work. Like have each project you work on finance something that you want for the next project, and that might be like a smart deployment pipeline. It might be a system for animation. It might be anything, but something. So you're always building forward. So you're not just making this game and throwing it out and moving on.
Right. That's really smart. I had no idea that's why they made that table tennis game, because I remember playing it, and I am I used to be, at least before the pandemic, an avid table tennis player. I remember playing it, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty fun, but I was like, why? It's pretty much just ping pong. It's not like a big, like, career mode or anything like that. It was just very much, here's what you can do. You can play by yourself. You can play with another person and have at it. I remember enjoying it, but that's crazy. That's what they did to get ready for GTA 4.
No, I mean, that's the story I was told, and I mean, if it's true, it's brilliant, because it's like, then you get the publisher. You get a publisher to finance your research, and you release a game in the meantime that maybe recoups that investment as well. So it's like,
right, it's not that much money.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so it's extremely smart. It's really, and it's something I've been thinking about ever since. It's like, I hope that we can be half as smart.
Yeah. That's really cool. So what's been the process like of getting this thing off the ground and hiring people? And I think another thing that's always really important, especially in today, is cultural identity and the identity of a studio.
Yeah, I mean, we have had a kind of hard time, because we did hire an additional programmer, brilliant person I worked with before, who's helped us build our DevOps pipeline automation, basically a lot of really cool stuff. We also hired a technical artist that's been working with us, but we've had more problems sort of finding art people to work with overall, because it's because basically everyone, I mean, there's this right brain, left brain kind of conflict. And I think that I frankly can't talk to artists. Like, I don't understand their language, and they don't understand me. So it's like, if you talk about things like, say, procedural generation, or you talk about systemics, or you talk about these things, a lot of artists will sort of feel that they lose control, or they will be very reluctant to sort of see it through, because they've seen all these bad examples. And that's what they know usually. And I mean, today you have Midjourney and all these kinds of things that also causes controversy. So it's really, for me, it's like, I get super excited about these systemic things, but I can't really communicate them to an artist. So for us, it's like the art director we're looking for, we need to find someone who can own that the way we own the systemic stuff, and who gets excited about the same things that we do.
So what do you think you guys need to do better in that search then, if you're not, or just in terms of communication with potential hires? I
think in a way we need to find someone who sits down with us and says, look, this is what you need. Shut up.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I think that's the person we need to an extent.
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, maybe we can't find that, and maybe we need to specify things more. Maybe we need to define the vision first. I don't know, but I've just realized that that's just not a skill I have. It's like, I don't think in visual ways. So it's actually been much trickier than I thought it would be. And it's like we had some great help with some concept art, and and things like that in the year. But finding someone to own that vision, it is hard.
Yeah, no, definitely, and that's a really interesting predicament that y'all find yourselves in. I think. I mean, it's. I don't think it's uncommon either.
No.
I know. Was talking to someone a while ago who had started their own company and also was a programmer, and he had a hard time finding artists that could really bring what he wanted to life as well. It seems like, it's one of those things that definitely takes longer than you think it will to really find someone to really hone that vision.
Yeah, and I mean, otherwise we have a plan where we didn't want to ramp up too fast, so we didn't want to have more than one extra employee spread out over a certain number of months, and we didn't want to we wanted to spend the whole of 2022 prototyping basically. And that's what we've been doing, and we've sort of come up with this. I think it's a 5-step or 6-step process where, first of all, you do throwaway prototypes, which is like, look, this is how our control scheme could work, for example, and then we discuss that and we implement the thing that makes sense, and then we do something we call proofing, which is we build a very rough, good enough prototype of a subsystem. Let's say that I don't know. Like a walk cycle simulator thing,
right.
Let's say, whatever it might be. And we look at that, and if it works, we write a long list of improvements, and then we move forward to the next one. So we just keep proofing as many systems as possible. But then a lot of programmers get tunnel vision. So to avoid tunnel vision, you sort of take all those things, and that's the next step, is to merge them together and see that they work. And then you keep doing this in cycles.
It's an overused term, but finding the fun is just so important in game design, as you know. And like, if you don't do that, I don't care how great your art looks if your game sucks. If your gameplay sucks, it doesn't really matter. Like, it needs to work together, right? The art needs to support game design and make sense, and art is extremely important. But if your game isn't fun to play, it really, who cares?
Absolutely. And I think fun to play, interesting to play. The cool thing with systemics is that you ask the player to experiment and ask what if and try things and do stupid stuff, and then you just allow it. That's really what it's about.
Right.
Like letting go of the sense of authorship that many other kinds of games thrive on.
Yeah, I think like emergent play is so much fun where that can happen. We made this. A lot of people who I work with now, we made a project together, indie title. And it was sort of like an RPG, and it was cooperative, but it also had a competitive element to it as well. And we had these items, and we had this one called a portal, and someone in a playtest basically changed positions with a player in midair while they were jumping off a cliff and killed them with the portal. It was like they were able to switch places like that. We had no idea someone could even think about doing that. That's the coolest thing ever. Like, I think when people find ways to not really break your design but enhance it with that those emergent moments are just priceless. I
mean, there were whole communities that were basically just shooting the warthog in Halo with a bunch of grenades, like trying to do trick explosions,
right?
And I mean, that was just the consequence of one grenade detonating another. But I love that stuff. I think that it's some of the best things games can offer is stuff was usually not intended.
Yeah, where it's just really unexpected. So I imagine you're not really as into more cinematic based games, Last of Us, Uncharted, etc., things like that, where it's there really isn't an emphasis on the systems as much as the story or sort of creating this experience where you don't really have a ton of opportunity for those emergent moments.
I do play them, and because I mean I do think that some level of game literacy is important, especially if you aspire to be a game designer.
Yeah.
But I mean, I definitely like I think so. Basically, I look at it as a scale between authorship and emergence, and you can't really have both. Like, you have to choose where on that scale you are. and I mean, definitely games like The Last of Us Part 2 is very much on the extreme authorship end. Like, this is a specific story being told. Like, I even did some experiments when I was playing it because I'm a cynical person. like we said.
Right.
And so, for example, there's a scene where you're I'm gonna try to avoid spoilers, but there's a scene where there's two characters fighting and you're playing one of them, and I didn't actually want to fight. Like I felt, hey, I don't want this character to win, so I just put down the
At
controller.
the end, right?
And exactly, and then you die and checkpoint reload and restart the fight, and you just have to. Like, there's no choice. It's like
right.
But actually, one of my most one of the things that annoyed me the most in recent years, I played the not Ragnarok, but I played the previous one, the God of War from 2018. Is it?
Yeah,
because it came out on Steam this year. I mean, it's very well presented, super polished game, but there's an early fight against some kind of boulder. Is that it? But
boulder,
like a long fight. And it's a button mashy, takes forever to play, and then it ends in a cutscene. I don't even get to actually finish the fight. It's like, why did I just spend 10, 15 minutes button mashing when it doesn't actually matter? Like, that's how I feel when I play one of those. Whereas a lot of other players, like reviewers, for example, they love that scene because it's a single cut and it's very cinematic. But for me, it's like I was so disappointed. I almost stopped playing at that point, and that's not very far into the game. So
that's like 15 minutes into it or something.
Exactly. So it's like I did finish it ultimately because I felt that was I had spent my money, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point though, and it's one of those things. Like for me, like the thing that really attracted me to the medium was how story could work. How I felt, as I come from a film background, so I always have this affinity for story in all forms, and I just thought what video games were doing, interactivity and storytelling, like even with cutscenes, I was like I felt more emotionally connected because I was like I feel like I am this character, I am this player. I remember playing God of War 2018. I'm actually replaying it right now, so because I want to play Ragnarok because I'm a huge God of War fan. But I just wanted to refresh myself on it, and I was like, with that opening scene, I kind of felt the same way. I was like, I wish there was more control. Like the fighting is good, and the camera angles, you mentioned like the one cut is great, but it's like every time Kratos would do something in a cutscene that was more badass than what I could do when I was playing, I was like, I really wish I could do that. I really wish I could do that.
That's exactly it, right?
Yeah.
You have this super long fight, and you've learned all the features, and you finally nail it, and you don't actually get to enjoy it. Like it's it's something that annoys me, and I mean it's very common in games these days. It's like the authorship part of it becomes so important that the emergence loses, and I think that is, I mean, it's not what I want. It's definitely what many customers want, and I don't. I mean, to each their own. Ultimately,
sure. And I also think about something like I don't know if you played Sekiro or in like the From Software games like Dark Souls. And
I did really like Bloodborne, and I played Demon Souls quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those are my two favorites. Especially Bloodborne was like my pandemic game. I like willed my way through it hours on end, and I thought that from like a systemic standpoint was a really fascinating project, and every fight just felt so dire. Especially the boss fights are so well designed, and you really have to figure out these weaknesses and just a way to stay alive. And it's so punishing to die. Yeah. It's like you can't just go around willy nilly. You have to really have a strategy, or it's like severe negative feedback loop kicks you right in the ass.
Yeah, but I think that what's very fascinating with the From Software games, I mean, part of it is also that they sort of trace their roots back to Looking Glass, because their first game was Kingsfield, which was highly Ultima Underworld inspired. So I mean, they do have this sort of history of systemics, and I think when Demon Souls came out, and you had diegetic abstractions of everything that you would normally have in a lobby menu or something, I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Like they made things immersive that are usually tedious with the soapstones and like the invitations to aid and invade and all those features was really, really, really cool. That part of it was amazing, I think. And also the fact that they don't really have like a difficulty. Instead, if you feel that it's too hard, you can grind. I mean, you're able to sort of regulate your difficulty level. I mean, is it a hidden trick that you can train to get better? No, but but it's I think it's a fascinating game series because usually what people take away from them is that they are hard, but they're just extremely well made.
Yeah,
It's
it's so well made. I definitely
yeah,
recommend Sekiro if you haven't played it. It was like their samurai game they did in I can't remember 2019 or something. And there's no real RPG elements, but it's got that same challenging combat, same challenging bosses, and where you feel like you're just in total control of the action. And the combat's some of the best I've ever played in a game. Where it puts such an emphasis on defense and really timing your parries and things like that. Where it's like if you don't do that, you will just get absolutely obliterated. And when you beat, like especially when I beat the final boss, I had to kill him 4 times without dying. And his health would just keep regenerating. But that last time, I was like, I almost cried. I was like, this took so long. This took like 150 times, but it was so worth it. Like, I don't get that reward from. Yeah.
What if you would have the cutscene as you kill it, right? and then
Yeah.
and then it.
And it wouldn't have mattered. Right. It wouldn't have mattered as much because it was like, I mean, I was like, I did all of that.
Yes.
And it just, those games, I feel like, I haven't played Elden Ring yet, but I feel like those games overall just reward the player so much. You feel such satisfaction from, and they don't really help you. Like you were saying, you're thrown into the deep end. You got to figure it out. And I just love the way they feel like they make games for a completely different decade in terms of like the way they're designed, which I love.
I think they're extremely fascinating. Like I have not played all the Dark Souls games because I got kind of bored with that formula. But that's, I mean, I play a lot of games, so it's like playing the second and third one was kind of, they might be absolutely brilliant games. I just don't know because I didn't have the patience for it. But it's Sekiro. I should definitely try.
It's totally different from like there's no RPG stuff, which I'm not a huge RPG fan, so I love that. I was like, all right, I'm just this dude. And I got a samurai sword, and let's go. That's pretty much it. And you just learn things along the way about how to like just play the game better, but still brutal, absolutely brutal in terms of how it's designed.
Yeah. No, I think it's. I think the coming 10, 20 years, I don't know how much time, I don't know when or anything, but I do think that systemic stuff is definitely coming back. I think people want those kinds of games right now.
Yeah.
Like even if you look at Roblox and what kids play, like I have 2 kids, and both of them play a lot of Roblox. The way they interact with games is kind of different. It's almost like it's a playground, like an extended play, extended reality. And there's so much stuff in Roblox that they can just switch around if they get bored. It's like it's a very different kind of play, and I think it's fascinating. It's like it's entirely make believe, moving in the social interaction, like playing hide and seek, for example, even though it's not even a hide and seek game. And I think it's very interesting, and that's systemics, right? It's what it is. They are sort of expecting that level of simulation and pretending it's there even when it's not. So I think that people growing up in the coming years, they will definitely engage with that kind of content. I think. I mean, there's always going to be room for cinematic, high production quality, cool stuff, right? Mm-hmm. That's never going to go away. But I mean, Nintendo has always been a very good producer of systemic games, and they are always selling millions of copies. So it sort of blows my mind why not more people try to engage with systemics.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also think that's a good thing that the industry is so diverse in terms of the offerings. It's like I truly believe at this point, in terms of where things are, there is actually something for everyone, regardless of what you're interested in, which I think is great.
I think the strength the industry has is exactly that. But I do think that there's an issue with sort of what the mainstream thinks games should be, and what they can be. Like a friend of mine, he said a thing that I often think about. It's like when you sit down to talk about a game and you talk about, say, camera perspective, you always start using these expressions like first person, third person, whatever it might be. But every time you do that, you sort of eliminate all the alternatives. It's like, what if you want to do a dueling game, but there's a frog perspective camera thing? Like there's no word for that, so you're not going to think about it.
Yeah.
So. And I thought that was such an interesting perspective, because it's like if you switch things around and you try not using those expressions, I mean, technically you can do whatever you want with the camera in a game. You have full control over that camera. So you can try things that are never done anywhere else. and that's just the camera. It applies to everything.
Yeah.
So I think the games are such a fascinating medium because we got stuck sort of mimicking Hollywood way too early.
Yes. Like right in like the late 90s, it really, like Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy. It's just kind of like, all right, now here comes the Hollywood influence, which I'm more jaded on now. Like that's what, like I said, that's what really got me into games. I was like, oh man, this is like cinema and games together. This is great. But I also think it's limiting for the reasons we talked about. But I also am just searching for like that one game that would be great if you can tell a story fully through interactivity without, and I know there are games out there, but I just don't feel like that do that. But I don't think we've hit that point yet where it's like without like cutscenes and stuff, and you're just feeling every second. You're doing things every second.
Is it is it okay to spoil a game that's 23 years old?
Sure.
So in System Shock 2 has one of the most vivid sort of revelations I've ever experienced in a video game. Like probably my age at the time, all those things, of course, there's other factors. Mm-hmm. But talking to Yanis Polito through the game, and she's telling you, and you're finally going to her office to meet her, you walk in there and you find a corpse, someone who's blown their brains out in her office. And you realize it's her. The wall falls down, and there's the evil AI that's tricked you all along. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's no cutscene. There's nothing. Like you're forced to stay in that room. Absolutely, it's kind of the Half-Life way of restricting you. But it's still like one of the most powerful moments I've experienced. And the reason is that I was there, right? It wasn't a story told to me; it was a story I experienced, and I think for me that's kind of the crucial thing, because I agree with you. I think finding ways to tell stories where I get to be part of it and not just like an observer. I think that is definitely like the holy grail in so many ways.
Yeah, for sure. I need to play the System Shock games because I love the BioShock games. I know BioShock 1 has a very similar ending, kind of. To System Shock 2.
I think the difference
it's a little different.
The difference is that, I mean, in System Shock 2, it was personal, right? It was really like I felt betrayed,
right?
in a very tangible way, which was amazing. Like it's just so well executed. I mean, frankly, if you play it today, the scene goes on for way too long, but it's but at the time it was brilliant.
Right.
It hasn't aged well, if I'm going to be honest. The UI least of all.
Yeah.
But I mean, in BioShock, I always felt like it was. I mean, it's very well written. It's very well made. It's a good game. But I felt it was kind of underwhelming because I never had a choice. Like the only choice I would have against the plot twist would be to turn off the game, basically.
Right. But I think that's the thing I liked about it the most is that the commentary and the illusion of control in a game, I think, was really pretty brilliantly written there. And then to the point where it's like, you have to kill, what's his name, Andrew Ryan at the end. And it's like, you really had no choice. And you thought you had, you don't really have any choice at all. Which I thought was just a really fascinating way to write for a game. That was one of the few moments where I was like, oh, wow, this is really fascinating to me in terms of story here.
Yeah, I think I was too jaded at the time, and I was felt, look, I know I didn't have a choice. Why do you have to rub my nose in it, right?
Right. That's totally fair. That's totally fair.
I said I was cynical, didn't I?
Yeah, no, you're right. I'd have a similar reaction if I had played it, now as opposed to when I played it. I can't remember when I played it. I was like 17 or 18 or something. So at that point, I was like, oh, man, this is so cool.
It is a good game. Like I'm not gonna devalue it. It's a good game.
Yeah. That actually kind of brings me to an interesting point. Ken Levine, the creator of that, I know his new game finally got announced. He hasn't made a game since BioShock Infinite in 2013, and I remember he started his own company too, and it just took him so long to, like I said, it's almost been 10 years since he's put a game out. And I heard it was just a lot of like building things up, tearing things down, starting over narrative, really thinking about, designing around the narrative as opposed to, finding the fun, I guess, initially. That's what I've heard.
I saw a presentation. I saw a presentation he did about sort of narrative Legos is the term he used, I think, where he was talking about sort of having different components interact, and if you do certain things, and then sort of simulating the world around the player to get the story across. Fascinating stuff, I think. But I actually missed this announcement, so I'll have to check that out after.
Yeah, I actually have to look at it. I actually haven't looked at it. I just know it got announced. I need to watch the video. It got announced during the Game Awards. But the question I have for you is for someone who is, starting their own company and working on stuff and whatnot. I mean, I think it's a really kind of a cautionary tale with what he's done because I feel like he's based on people that have left there. What I've heard is like he kind of he alienated people because they built all these assets, built all these things, and then he'd scrap it for the narrative and start the narrative over, and then they build it up again, and then it's like the process kept repeating itself. So yeah, to the point where it was like it's taken 10 years to get this game to where it can finally actually get fully announced. So what are some things you're thinking about when you're creating now and thinking about your 10-year plan and whatnot, and making sure you're hitting that so that you can avoid sort of almost taking too long to get your vision out there?
I think the major thing here is that in our team, everyone has made games before, so we sort of know what the problems will be. So we have a pretty good structure for stuff like menus and options, and I mean the things that you think will not take any time that we know takes time. We've done most of it because my co-founder had already run an indie studio for a number of years, so a lot of the infrastructure that we know is needed is already there. So thinking about stuff like localization or porting or all the practical stuff, because I know from experience that eats a lot of time. But speaking of the 10-year plan, I think the big deal there is that we know when we have to release the first game. I can't say that now, but we know when we have to release the first game. So we just have to adapt sort of. That means we might just do 2 or 3 of our build forward systems for the first project. But then we know what we want to do, like how we want to increase our ambitions for the next project. I do think that this is a good way to work if you're primarily technical, because it's usually the technology that takes the longest to figure out. But we have sort of done some of the things that I know for a fact that some of my old colleagues will think that stuff we've done is entirely unnecessary and too early. But I actually think of it the other way. Like one very clear example is automation, like porting, automation, those kinds of things for consoles or whatever platforms you want to release on. When I worked with mobile games, a lot of studios, they would have the iOS and Android stuff up and running in a week or two because you know that you have those platforms. So you want them early and you want to see that it works along the way. And that's something I wanted to do for our platforms too, early on. Even though some of the stuff that we've sort of the process that we've been through, a lot of studios will do that in the last 6 months instead. But I believe that the mobile way is just better because then we know it works on our target platform, and we can build the game today. Yeah, and we have automation for stuff that you might actually have to hire people for later if you don't do it early. So that's one example. Like we sort of try to think ahead. And I mean, everyone does that, but that's really, I think that's the best answer I have, actually.
Yeah. That makes sense. Is like when something's going to release, and you know what you need to do in order to make that happen. You're not getting lost in. So I also think it's an interesting thing. Is I've talked to some people on the show that work for bigger franchises like a Call of Duty, and or Borderlands and things like that, and they always say, the narrative is kind of constructed much later on in development. Like we're not really thinking about the narrative. The narrative people who are writing are sort of trying to keep up with us. Whereas I think for Ken Levine's studio, it's the other way around, where the narrative kind of dictates everything. And in game design, that can be a really, really slippery slope, especially when you're trying to make something that is probably to the scale that he wants to make something, knowing his ambition.
Yeah. No, it's going to be fascinating to see. But I think for us, I do think that narrative, art, everything is supposed to reinforce the player's experience. So for me, I mean, narrative, if we're talking about dialogue or cutscenes or whatever form of narrative we might be talking about, I think all of it is going to have to reinforce the game, and this is a big thing for me, because I think, for example, dialogue works best when it's feedback, like responses to what you're doing in some way. There was a talk I saw once by Robin Hunick, and she was talking about sort of dynamics versus fidelity. Where like fidelity for visual fidelity, and how many games, like the more we push one of them, the harder it gets to improve the other. Like, so with very high visual quality, making interaction more dynamic is much harder, because, for example, voice animations or those kinds of things, uncanny valley happens because it is a very super realistic model, but you see that something is off with it.
Yeah.
So doing like a very detailed dialogue system when you have super realistic characters is actually pretty hard. So that was also fascinating, because I think one thing she mentioned is why don't characters in a simulated world react more to what you do? Like, if you press the wrong button and you manage to throw your gun away or something, why don't someone comment?
Yeah, it breaks immersion when like the environment around you doesn't react the way you would expect it to.
Exactly, and for me, like, one of the worst things I know when dialogue is not responsive, it's trying to tell me things. It's nag lines of different kinds, like, no, I think we should go through this door. Maybe we should open this door. Maybe the red door is important. You know those lines, right? I hate them. It's look, I'm gonna find the door because it's literally the only place I can go.
Yeah, that was happening to me the other day with God of War 2018. The Atreus was like, "Dad, we can go over this bridge over here. It's over here," and I was like, "Oh, yeah." It's also like, let me figure it out. I'd rather figure it out than have someone tell me. And also, I'm Kratos. Like, the kid shouldn't know more than me, you know.
Well, you're an old man.
I'm an old man. Yeah. Who knows how old he is at this point? It looks like he's pushing 50. But it is a weird thing with like how to really make dialogue work in a game and story work in a game. I still feel like it's that nut that has never been fully cracked the way that it can. I feel like it's just such an interesting process. People try to approach it so many different ways.
My favorite is still like there's a fantastic talk, probably the GDC link I've sent to most people through the years, but it's from 2012. It's by Elon Ruskin. It's how they did dialogue in Left 4 Dead, and it's basically a database system where you gather context and state in the moment, and you send it to the database, and you get very specific dialogue back.
Yeah.
Based on the context, and that's completely responsive, but it works extremely well. And there are some examples of games that do that. Like, one of my favorite memories in this context was from Thief: The Deadly Shadows, or Thief 3, I guess, where I just got my wall climbing gloves, the game's replacement for the rope arrow, and then I'm climbing a wall and I fuck up and I land in a lantern light, and there's a guard below me, and he's like, "You can't stay up there forever, and I'm gonna be right here waiting for you." And I'm like, "Damn it!" But it was so awesome. Like, it
That's
reinforced
cool.
the whole scene. It's very specific line, and I think that is exactly what dialogue should do. It should be very contextual. I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 right now, and
yeah.
They have a very interesting context system where you select a person and you can choose greet or rob and different kinds of things, and the line that gets spoken is extremely contextual, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I think they really stepped that up into big time in terms of how you can interact with just random people, and people kind of started to react a little more realistically as well to what you were doing, which was really cool. Yeah.
I think the first time I thought about it was actually because I worked at Starbreeze. I started at Starbreeze when they were doing The Darkness, and one of the first times I played The Darkness, there's some mafiosos you're talking to in the subway, and I'm talking to them. There's dialogue trees and all that stuff, but then I realized I could still control my characters. I stepped away, and he's like, "Hey, I was talking to you," and that reaction, like, suddenly I was still playing. Like, I was not locked in this stare down dialogue state.
Right. It's really easy, I think, too, when something like that happens, where you are locked down. It's sort of like your interest starts to wane because that control. You just feel that lack of control at that point when someone's just talking your ear off. Yeah. One thing I'm always fascinated with, and it sounds like you have some experience with, is procedural generation. Are you guys working with that at all in this new title?
Procedural generation is one of the most fascinating parts of systemic design, most definitely.
Yeah.
I think the danger you do have is that sort of what I think my read of sort of the No Man's Sky, let's call it the controversy when it was released. My read is that you have a super passionate developer be the mouthpiece for the project, and he's talking about sort of the ambitions and what they want to do, and a mix of things of what they're doing and what they want to do, and people sort of try to interpret that, and they understood it as they're going to have their own Star Trek, basically. And I think that's the danger of procedural generation. I don't think it's easy to say what we do that is procedural. But the simple answer is yes.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have that caveat there, because it's like you can do this in so many different ways, and we have sort of an idea where there's a spectrum. So basically, we can go from having something be generated, let's say we have Crossroads or whatever it might be, to being completely authored, so like a set piece place that you visit in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very there was a great designer, the name eludes me right now, but she said that you should always sort of spice your procedural generation with handmade set pieces, simply because it will make everything seem better.
How do you combine that?
I think that is a great idea.
Yeah. How do you combine that, though, where you do have like the procedural generation, but you do have something that is handmade mixed together?
I mean, let's say that you are traveling in some kind of open world-ish game, and you're going along a road. I mean, the road will basically look the same. It doesn't actually matter if it turns right or left to you as you're playing. But then maybe you come across like a tower or a skyscraper or a hovel or whatever it might be, a building, and there's an event there that plays out where someone is throwing out their spouse and really angry and throwing out the chairs and the luggage after them, and that could be a scripted event in that procedural environment. So I mean, that's really what it's about. It's like having proceduralizing the right things is what it's about. Like the intersection that turns right or left doesn't matter as much, that you can proceduralize, but the events and the behavior of the game, that should be more carefully constructed.
Yeah.
So basically, like the logic we've been talking about is kind of like a Magic the Gathering booster pack. So if you open one, there's going to be one rare card, there's going to be 3 uncommons, and whatever the statistics are. And that's kind of how it is. Like you might have 11 or 12 standard intersections, but then there's going to be a few interesting events, and maybe then there's like the treasure trove or the very special place that you can find.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of looking at it, and probably a great way to go about making it. Because I think with No Man's Sky, I haven't played it, but I feel like I have after watching way too many videos and things like that. Because I remember I was excited for it, but when it came out, I remember everybody hated it, and it was like, man, this really didn't work. And then I think it's gotten better over the years, but I kind of lost interest. But I thought like that was just trying to do too much with it. Whereas I think what I can't remember their names, but the Shadow of Mordor developers, what they did with all the orc bosses in those games they made, that was a really cool example of it, in the sense that you had all these pieces to play with, all these abilities for all the bosses, and you just sort of mixed them together and spat out a new one. And, you know, that eventually it started to get a little repetitive because there's only so many combinations you can do. But it was a really, really cool way of going about it. And it was my first real exposure to procedural generation. I was like, oh, man, that kept me going. Like, especially when I first started playing that game, I was like, oh, my God, they're all, like, different every time. I was just totally immersed in that.
I listened to a great interview that got me thinking too, with I think it was one of the developers of the Into the Breach, and they were talking about how they realized that their tools were just easier to use than trying to make a procedural system that generated these tile puzzles, basically, with their mech game. So they ended up making hundreds of handmade levels instead of trying to figure out the proceduralization problem. So, but the effect for the user, like the player, hundreds of levels, they're not going to remember hundreds of levels.
Right.
For them, it's going to be the same as if it was procedural. So, I mean, sometimes it's really not the right way. Sometimes it's might even actually be more problematic, because, I mean, writing code that generates things in a good way is hard. and some things can't be effectively proceduralized.
Yeah.
So it's really like it's a complex problem, and I think too often it's just like the classic sort of procedural generator is a quilting kind of system where you just patch things together and then you're happy with it, which like for dungeon generators and the like. And I mean, it's fun, it works, and a lot of games use it very powerfully, but it's also kind of primitive.
And really, I mean, I feel like it's a lot like narrative in a way. I don't think there's still so far people can take it. But I think you bring up a really good point about how to utilize it effectively. It's like, don't just make everything procedural. Like, have something handmade in there too, to make sure it's sort of grounded, or else, it could get out of control. I mean, we were talking to, it's actually our first podcast episode. This husband-wife team had made their own company, and one's artist, one's a programmer, and she was talking about how the levels are pretty much all procedurally generated. And I played their demo too, and I was like, this actually works pretty well. But they were able to scale down the levels in a way to the point where you didn't really, it felt like they were handmade. So they're figuring out a really good way to keep it contained and make sure that it isn't going to break the experience. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also really easy to go No Man's Sky and just lose your mind with it too. So
yeah. I mean, there's a problem in procedural generation. I think the name of the researcher who came up with this term is Kate Compton, and it's the oatmeal problem. So basically, you can generate 10,000 bowls of oatmeal. They're going to be unique, like the grains and the amount of milk and all of it. But I mean, a player is just going to see a lot of oatmeal.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the problem that you can see in some of these games. I mean, I have not played enough No Man's Sky to say that it has this problem, but it's can you make a gazillion planets? Sure, but what if, I visit 1,000 of them? Is it going to matter?
Right. Yeah, I would rather have 5 kick-ass planets than 1,000 so-so planets.
Exactly. That's sort of one of our other sort of ideas, is that behavior beats content. Having 1,000 planets is not as interesting as having a story about when you crashed on one, or being chased by living asteroids or something. I don't know. So I mean, having behavior be interesting, and that's like that. That's what you remember. That's what's interesting overall. Like it doesn't actually matter if you have 1,000 dungeons or 1,000 planets. Ultimately, it's what happens inside them or on them.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's one thing, when I was younger, I was always upset. It was like, this game's only 10 hours long or whatever. And now I kind of beg for that, because it's like, one, I don't have as much time, don't play as many games. Two, there's really something to be said about just quality over quantity. If I'm playing a first person shooter, how many times can I go into a room and get in a firefight with somebody before I'm like, oh God, I got to do this again? How many ways can you mix that up to the point where that stays fresh? You can only do it so many times.
I mean, it's been done for 30 years, so
of course.
Pretty much,
of course,
many ways, apparently.
Yeah, but I mean, you can do it, but it's like, I don't need to do that for 25 hours in a single game, or something like that. I mean, even just replaying through God of War, I'm trying to get, because I know my wife's getting me Ragnarok for Christmas, and I'm like, I gotta finish it because I really want to play Ragnarok. And I'm like, damn, this is long. This is a lot longer than my classic God of War, which is 8 to 10 hours. I'm like, man alive, this is really fun again, but I like to just finish this.
I felt like that when I now started playing Red Dead Redemption 2 for the second time. It's like, all right, yeah, that's another area that is on the map, right? Yeah. Okay, so if I ride in this direction, there's even more map over here. It's huge.
Yeah, especially 2. 2 is crazy. I feel like playing a Rockstar game is like giving birth for me. It takes me 9 or 10 months to beat every single one that I actually play. It's Grand Theft Auto 5 took me 4 years. I mean, it's like,
wow.
Good God, there's just so much. There's so much you can do, and it's so easy to get lost in it.
But it's also a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which is the one I have freshest in memories. Since I'm playing it, but it's such a weird game because it's extremely systemic. It has all these very fascinating things you can do, and the horse is afraid of snakes, and you have to calm it down. And there's so much stuff going on. But then the mission kicks on, right? It starts. And one of them I was playing. I was supposed to stake out some place or attack some place. I don't remember.
Mhm.
And I saw a hill, and I was walking over to that hill, and then the mission just fails. Like you walk too far away or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Like you have this fantastic systemic game, and I love so many of their systems, but when it's mission time, it's like it's just a different game. Like we're playing make believe in this area right now.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. I mean, I can think of in Red Dead 1, you couldn't swim. And I remember I walked into the water once by accident, and I was like up to my knees, and then it was just like dead. And I was like, wait, what? What do you mean? I didn't even like get a chance to drown, and I'm dead. But yeah, I never really thought about it like that. It is kind of like, one of my favorite interactions in 2 is, these legendary animals. I'll never forget the bull gator. I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
Not yet.
Oh my God. It's like the biggest alligator you've ever seen. It's absolutely terrifying. It's so much fun. And it's a side thing, right? It's not like a mission, but I mean, all those events are just so intense and so fun. And the missions are good too, but they're very much more like scripted sort of set pieces. You don't really have the freedom to do what you can do in the open world. It'd be really cool if they could figure out some way to sort of marry that together.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview, I think, with Todd Howard from Bethesda, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about that they want their games, like when you're playing a mission, all of the simulation is still running. They don't turn it off, so weird things can still happen when you're playing a mission, for example.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking about sort of the games I did play in the 90s, like Ultima, for example, Ultima 7 and those games. Because that was basically a world simulation. Like it didn't really care. Like it had a story and all those things, absolutely, and that was what it was about. But it was mostly a world simulation. You could just, I don't know, you could bake some bread. You can do just random shit.
Yeah.
and I think that is so fascinating, because it's like it goes back to what got me excited about video games when I was a kid. And Red Dead Redemption and some of these games, they almost have it.
Yeah, very close.
So it's fascinating. Like I read a really interesting. Sorry if I interrupted you, by the way.
Oh no, please.
No, I read a very interesting. I think it was Reddit thread or something like it, or forum post, something. But it was someone complaining about Ultima 7 specifically, which is one of my favorite games of all time, and I realized why. But because this was a much younger person than myself who was playing Ultima 7, and they were so annoyed because they just kept filling their backpack with stuff, and they didn't need that stuff. Like, why do I need 7 candelabras or whatever it might be? And I realized that that's because they're playing it with a modern mindset. If you play Cyberpunk 2077, you're going to vacuum clean the environment of anything that's not, I don't know, that's interactive, because that's how you play modern RPG. But in Ultima 7, everything has its place. Like I don't need a candelabra if I don't need light. I'm not going to pick up this bucket unless I need to transport water in it, right?
So you just picked up too many things. I got it.
Exactly. so suddenly you're playing an old game that is a world simulation, and you're playing it by vacuum cleaning it of loot, which is going to be everything that's not soon shut.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting to me, because that just says so much about how we interpret games, and how we think games should be designed. That's fascinating. Yeah. That's really fascinating to me.
I love that thread, because it was like a lot of people agreeing and some people suggesting how you could organize your backpack and things like that. So it was very constructive. It was not complaints ultimately. Sure. It was very constructive. So I actually really liked it, because I realized that it's basically 2 entirely different philosophies. Like, if you do the world simulation thing, then you have to understand everything's place in the world simulation. But if you're doing the sort of modern RPG, vacuum cleaning, crafting kind of thing, then those 2 are just not compatible at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it says so much about just how our experiences just inform our expectations.
Definitely.
God, it's so cool. That's a really cool. That sounds like a cool thread. Sounds like a really cool thread. And I'd be interested to go, and because I haven't played that game either, Ultima 7. So I would be interested to see, like, what would I think about that? What would be my expectations going into that, knowing that it's made in a different era would probably inform, and obviously talking about this would inform what I think about it. But how would I react to it? Would I think that's good design, or would I think, oh, no, I don't like this, just because of what I'm used to and what I'm not used to? Fascinating.
It is. I think in a way I really like those kinds of world simulation games. I think that it's something I do miss to an extent, but it's also like Zelda Breath of the Wild. That's a game that shows you how you can do that in a modern context. Like it really works like a mix of the modern and the old. I think it's a fascinating game. One of my favorite games in recent years.
Yeah, it's a really. I mean, I haven't played it. I've watched my wife play it enough over the last few years to really get a sense of it. She's a huge Zelda fan. I just remember, like, every time I watch it, though, something new's always happening. There's always something new that she's doing. There's some, like, and it's not even like any of like the story based stuff. It's just her exploring. I've never seen some of the things that happen in that open world and other open world games, in terms of the variance, in terms of what can happen, in terms of how you can get out of a situation, especially with that hang glider thing. I mean, I was like, damn, I have to start playing this. This is this is really cool.
I think it's well worth playing, and especially from the perspective of systemics, because it's very, like, I'm a broken record apparently, but yeah, systemics.
Systemics. I think I'm just gonna call this episode Systemics.
It's the thing. Yeah, I mean, I should of course mention, like, a lot of people talk about immersive sims, for example.
Yeah,
it's almost like a fad to talk about immersive sims, but I think the danger there is that you typically sort of, you boil them down to a specific set of features depending on your preferences. So if you're a huge Deus Ex fan, it's going to be like Deus Ex. If you're a huge Thief fan, it's going to be like Thief. And I think that basically sounds like, okay, it has to be first person, it has to have stealth, and it has to have 451 be the first code you use.
Mm-hmm. yeah.
And I think that's the shallow, boring part, like the simulation aspects of it, and the developers as designers, and those things that made those games what they were. I think that's the cool part of it. That's what's how it was made is a huge part of it.
Yeah. So you're in year, I guess you're going, this is the first year of your 10-year plan. So what does success look like for you guys getting into your second year?
I mean, we have actually finished all the goals we had for this year, and we've finished before the end of the year. We've done a lot more than we had anticipated. We have basically, we have a running start going into the second year. So what we need to do is we need to find an art director. We need to ramp up for producing and shipping the game. That's what we need to do next. But that's a process.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'm really looking forward to the next year. Like I've worked with games for 16 years, like I said. But we started off this year saying this is the first time we make games. Like,
right,
we have worked on games before, but now we make games. It sounds like a tiny difference, but yeah.
No, it's a huge difference. I think, it's like that shot in the arm that you need. I mean, I relate to that as someone who creates things, and I'm not really making games anymore, but from a music and film standpoint, sort of the side stuff I do, and it's like when you're actually doing it for yourself, it's such a big difference than working on someone else's project. You feel like you have that ownership, and it really does motivate you more than anything else. I think if you are a creative person, so I mean, I totally get it, and I think that's awesome that you're doing that, and that you have that enthusiasm 16 years later. That, like, this is like this big shot in the arm here. I think that's wonderful.
I think there's two ways. If I look at just the people I've talked to in the recent year trying to hire and so on, there's two branches you can end up in, right? Or three technically, but the third one is that you leave the industry,
right?
But in the industry, so there's two branches. One of them would be you get jaded, you're bored, it's just a job. You work your 8 hours, you go home, you hang out with your family, you're passionate about something else in life than work. And the other is that you retain the passion, and with much or little cynicism, you sort of just try to find the next challenge, whatever that might be. It might be a new position at your job. It might be a new project, a new company, something else. But for me, it's always been like making games with people I really trust and like working with, and who believe in the same things I believe in.
That's awesome. And Martin, thanks so much for stopping by and talking to us. And really enjoyed getting cynical with you. And wish you best of luck in the new year, and hope you keep on keeping on with this 10-year plan and get yourself an art director and bring this puppy home.
I hope so too. And thank you. So this was like a casual conversation about games. That's
I love it.
Any time of the day, right?
Yeah, fantastic. All right, that's going to wrap up our show for this week. We want to thank Martin again for being our guest. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our community on Discord. And of course, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.